Let's now welcome leading tech evangelist, futurist and thought leader, Mr. Aki Anastasiou. Aki, it's great to have you with us on the show. Welcome. So firstly, it's quite crucial to reiterate the fact that this is still a proposal on the minister's part that still needs to go through, of course, Parliament as well as public scrutiny. But in a nutshell, Aki, say it's approved, right? What would it mean for future investors, particularly in the ICT sector? Will it really address the current bottlenecks that we are seeing within the industry?
Hello, Alicia. Good afternoon to you, and thank you for having me on the show. Well, firstly, I think that the technology itself has got tremendous opportunity and can add tremendous value to people that don't have access to well-priced connectivity in the rural areas. And we've seen this across the continent of Africa. Remember, the population of 1.4 billion across the continent, only 38% of Africa's population has internet access, according to the Internet Telecommunications Union. South Africa is slightly different. We have a more mature market and we've got a lot more coverage across our country, but there are still significant parts of our country that are not adequately served.
Let's say this proposal is then approved. What does it mean in essence?
Well, it means basically that people who don't have access to high-speed internet connectivity in really rural areas where there's no access to 5G, for example, and there's no access to fiber networks, will have access to high-speed internet connectivity. So think of, remote towns across the country, mines, for example, schools that have not have adequate internet connectivity. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't available as yet. It is. You can get internet connectivity from other satellite communications, but it's quite expensive, and this is where Starlink comes in. It brings the price dramatically down, and we've seen the success rate of Starlink across countries like Nigeria and Kenya and Mozambique, for example, where the network's been rolled out, where the prices have dropped and it's become a lot more accessible to connect people to the internet and have high-speed internet connectivity, and businesses as well.
Mm-hmm. So very interesting. Maybe I could just outline to us, how would then Starlink actually operate here in South Africa?
Well, look, let's first explain how Starlink works. So Starlink is a satellite system, and it's a low-orbit satellite. It sits about 600 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And Starlink has about 8,000 of these satellites spread across the globe, just pushing down internet connectivity to the receivers. So in every country, you'll have a Starlink uplink, which is connected to a big data center that really just pushes data up into the satellites. And then users typically have a smaller dish that will connect to one of the satellites, and you'll be able to access internet from the satellite. So these satellites, typically, as I said, sit about 600 kilometers above the Earth's surface. And typically, a satellite like one of the DSTV satellites, for example, those sit about 36,000 kilometers into the orbit, just to give you an idea of the difference of these particular satellites. So they're sitting all over the place, and you can literally access this high-speed connectivity with low latency, and download speeds of between 40 and 200 megabits per second, or upload speeds of 8 to 25. So really offering a real differentiator to high-speed internet connectivity in those areas that are not served with that speed.
And hopefully affordability as well, Aki. I mean, let's go back to earlier inputs there. I suppose a lot of people might have missed the start of our interview. I suppose it's great to have, of course, market competition, Aki, as it drives down, as you alluded to earlier, the high prices and also assures ethical market practices. And you are aware of South Africa's current high data price debacle. Many feeling it's simply just too expensive in some instances, as you mentioned earlier, not accessible or even reliable, especially when you look at those far-flung rural areas. So that's the good side. But what happens then when the market is flooded with non-compliant international companies where they are not governed by traditional business operating regulations? It leaves room for being a serious risk to consumers.
Well, yes, but the minister highlighted earlier, as you mentioned, and played the interview, the telecommunications minister, Solly Malatsi, stated that the objectives of this new policy change that is being proposed is to encourage investment, including strategic infrastructure and investment. And of course, it also, increases innovation. So if you can imagine that the more people that have high-speed internet access, of businesses, etc., it actually encourages business growth. And we've seen in many countries around the world where there is high-speed internet connectivity and it has a direct impact to GDP. So these underserved areas really need to be part of the rest of the country's connectivity options that we have. And I think that's where it will make a big difference. It's in a very regulated market. And of course, the mobile networks have got their systems up in place. But in many of these underserved areas, you cannot get this kind of high-speed internet connectivity. And yes, globally, there are competitors out there to Starlink. There are, AWS, for example, has a similar service. But the advantage that Starlink has is, of course, Elon Musk owns the company called SpaceX, and they're launching those Falcon 9 rockets every single month into space. And along with those rockets, they launch these satellites. And this is why they've got around 8,000 of these satellites around the globe, giving them that advantage to be able to offer this high-speed internet connectivity. So it's a very costly business if you don't have the infrastructure to roll out these satellites into that low orbit area that we spoke about.
Absolutely. And Aki, initially the issue was not allowing new competitors, particularly Starlink, in the market or to come and actually operate in South Africa. It was the compliance issue. So, going forward, what is the overall return of investment for South Africa then in allowing such a legal or business operating model to actually be implemented?
Well, look, I think we need to look at it from a different perspective, perhaps. And we're part of a global village now. 20 years ago, when you didn't have the penetration that you had of cloud infrastructure and where you store your data, AI, for example. So today, most of the interaction that you have on the internet is going via some data center. Now, in South Africa, we now have more data centers coming into South Africa. But, most of these companies, the data centers are sitting abroad, the technology sitting abroad, the likes of Microsoft, for example, who've also got a specific deal with government, and they've empowered other sectors of the economy, people that were underserved before. They'll come up with different links. But the reality is that we've got international companies who want to do business in South Africa. And what we have to work out as South Africans is it more beneficial for us or is it less beneficial for us? Do we make some sort of amendments to include these technologies? Because these technologies ultimately will have a direct benefit on our economy and it will improve people's lives by empowering them to have that internet connectivity. And, in the world that we're living in today, you cannot ignore having that internet connectivity. It's really a differentiator for companies and organizations and countries and economies.
Absolutely, Aki. If taxis are also talking about providing that free Wi-Fi in the taxis, then you suppose this is definitely the route to go. Aki, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for engaging with me this afternoon. Mr. Aki Anastasiou there. He's leading Tech Evangelist, Futurist, as well as a Thought Leader, weighing in on that proposed review of some of the compliance issues there pertaining to, of course, the ICT sector. That proposal is, of course, has been tabled by Minister Solly Malatsi.